Here's a fact nobody tells you about getting robbed by your own kid. You don't feel it in your chest first. You feel it in your hands. Mine were completely steady, holding a coffee mug, while my entire financial life sat on a screen reading a number I hadn't seen since I was 22 and broke. $0.00. I'm Andy Jackson. I'm 72 years old. I spent 38 years as a fraud investigator for a regional bank headquartered 2 hours east of here in Charlotte, tracking down people who thought they were smarter than the systems built to catch them. I retired 3 years ago with a good pension, a paid-off house in the Montford Historic District of Asheville, North Carolina, and a wife named Linda, who I'd been married to for 45 years. Linda passed away 20 months before the morning I'm about to tell you about. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't the kind of thing I want to spend this story dwelling on, because Linda deserves better than being a plot device in her own tragedy. What matters is this. In her last year, lying in a hospital bed with tubes running into the back of her hand, she made me promise her one thing. Not a headstone, not a plaque with her name on a hospital wall. She wanted a place, an actual roof, actual beds, actual staff for kids aging out of the North Carolina foster system with nowhere to land. Linda had been one of those kids herself, back before I knew her, and she never fully stopped being one, not in the parts of her that mattered. We spent the last 2 years of her life planning it, a defunct youth center on the west side of town near the river that we were going to buy and gut and rebuild. Her life insurance policy, $537,000, was earmarked, dollar for that building. Not for me. Not for retirement. For her promise. That Thursday morning in early March, I sat at my kitchen island with a mug of black coffee going cold, tapping through my banking app to pay a utility bill, the way I do every week. The number that came up where $537,000 should have been sitting was 0. This is a mistake, I told myself. Banks make mistakes. I spent 38 years fixing exactly this kind of mistake. I refreshed the app. 0. I want you to understand something about how a man who spent his whole career chasing fraud actually reacts to being defrauded, because it's not what you see in the movies. I didn't drop the mug. I didn't gasp. I set the coffee down very carefully on the marble counter, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to break. And I sat there in the silence of a house that had been too quiet for 20 months already, and I thought, somebody moved my money, and I am going to find out exactly who. That's when I heard the crash from the front hallway. I walked out of the kitchen and found my own front door standing wide open, morning light spilling across the hardwood, and 2 men in work boots wrestling my grandmother's cedar hope chest, the one Linda had refinished herself the summer we got married, down the porch steps toward a moving truck idling at the curb. "Excuse me," I said. Not loud. I didn't need loud. 38 years of interviewing embezzlers teaches you that volume is for people who don't actually have leverage. What exactly are you doing with my furniture? The bigger of the 2 men, a guy with a sunburned neck and a clipboard hanging off 2 fingers, barely looked up. "Just doing the job, sir. Client wants the house cleared by noon." Client. "Yes, sir." I held out my hand for the clipboard. He handed it over without much resistance. Movers get paid the same whether or not the old man in the doorway makes a scene, and this one clearly wanted to avoid a scene. I unfolded the work order. There, at the bottom on the authorization line, was a signature I would know if you woke me up at 3 in the morning and shoved it in my face. My son's handwriting. Fast, looping, always in a hurry, exactly the way it looked on every school permission slip I'd signed for him, and every one he'd forged for himself in the 8th grade, until his teacher called me about it. Ryan Jackson, 34 years old. My only child. I tried my key in the deadbolt out of pure reflex, the way you touch a stove someone told you was hot. It didn't turn. They'd rekeyed my own front door while I was standing in the kitchen with a mug of coffee going cold. Here's the part I need you to sit with, because it's the whole hinge of this story. I did not call the police. I did not call Ryan back screaming. I folded that work order, handed it back to the mover, and said, "Just be careful with the chest. The hinges are original." Then I walked out to my car and I let them keep loading. You're probably yelling at your screen right now. I get it. But you have to understand something about catching a thief. And my son had, in the space of one morning, become exactly that. The very first rule, the rule I built an entire career on, is that a confident thief makes mistakes a scared one never would. If I panicked, if I called the police right then, Ryan would lawyer up by lunch and spend the next 2 years telling a judge this was all a misunderstanding about elder care. I needed him relaxed. I needed him celebrating. I needed him talking. So before I did anything else, I called the one person who'd known me longer than my own son had been alive. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every one. Sam Whitfield picked up on the second ring. Sam and I go back to 1981, when he was a rookie federal prosecutor in Charlotte, and I was a 31-year-old junior investigator handing him wire records on an insurance fraud case that made both our careers. He'd been retired from the U.S. Attorney's Office for 6 years and now ran a small private practice 2 blocks off Pack Square in downtown Asheville. Mostly estate work, mostly favors for old friends. Sam, I said, standing in my own driveway watching strangers carry my dead wife's belongings into a truck. It's Andy. I need you to open the Jackson file. Today. There was a pause. Sam knew exactly what that meant, because 4 years earlier, right after Linda's diagnosis, the two of us had sat in his office for 6 hours building something we half-joked, half-meant to call the Jackson file. A contingency plan for exactly the kind of situation I never expected to actually need. Say the word, Andy. Considerate said. He didn't ask questions. That's the difference between a friend and an acquaintance. A friend trusts you've already thought it through. I still needed one more thing before this went any further, though. Not evidence. A confession. Circumstantial paperwork is never enough. I'd watched 100 slick defense attorneys chew through circumstantial paperwork like it was nothing. I needed Ryan's own voice, on the record, admitting what he'd done. I opened a recording app on my phone, a legal one-party consent app, because North Carolina allows a call to be recorded as long as one person on the line knows about it. And I was that person. And I dialed my son. He picked up on the 4th ring, and before I even heard his voice, I heard the party behind him. Bass. Laughter. Somebody yelling for somebody named Marissa to bring more ice. Hey, kind of a bad time, Dad. There are movers in my house, Ryan. My bank account is empty. I think this is exactly the right time. A pause. Muffled talking. He'd covered the phone to say something to somebody, probably his fiancée Whitney. Then his voice came back, and the slur from the party had drained clean out of it. What replaced it was flat and rehearsed, the tone of a man who'd practiced this speech in a mirror. Dad, listen. My wedding is tomorrow. I withdrew the money and I sold the house. It needed to happen. You sold my house. You weren't using that money for anything real, Dad. A shelter. Come on. Mom's gone. You can't build her back with a building. I'm building an actual future. For me, for Whitney. You should be proud we're finally taking initiative instead of waiting around. That money was for your mother's promise, Ryan. And now it's for mine. A dry laugh, the kind that has no warmth left in it at all. Honestly, Dad, ever since your stroke, Whitney and I talked about it a lot. You're not as sharp as you think you are anymore. This is better for everybody. Consider it an early inheritance. I just saved you the trouble of an estate. I want to be very clear about the stroke he's referencing, because it matters later. 20 months earlier, within days of Linda's funeral, I'd had a minor ischemic event, mild, fully resolved within 6 weeks, confirmed by 2 separate neurologists who cleared me for everything from driving to managing my own finances. I'd signed a temporary medical and financial power of attorney during the 2 weeks I was in the hospital, purely as a precaution, naming Ryan as a backup. The moment I was discharged, I revoked it in writing, with Sam as my witness. That document had been dead for well over a year. Ryan didn't know. Where exactly am I supposed to live tonight? I asked, letting my voice do something it hadn't done yet. Crack, just slightly. Right on cue. That's not really my problem now, Dad. Figure out an extended stay place. Whatever the movers get for your stuff should cover a few weeks. After that, I don't know. Maybe it's time to look at assisted living. Somewhere with people watching you. A beat. Then, flat and final. Good luck. The line went dead. Good luck. Those were the last words my son said to me before his wedding. Not I love you. Not even a real goodbye. Good luck. Like I was a stranger he was cutting off in traffic. I stood in my driveway with a recording exactly 1 minute and 51 seconds long, saved to an encrypted folder on my phone, and I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't grief and wasn't rage. It was clarity. Cold, exact, professional clarity. The same feeling I used to get in 38 years of interview rooms the moment a suspect said one sentence too many. The movers finished loading around 11:30. I let them. I stood at the end of my own driveway and watched a truck pull away carrying 45 years of my marriage, and then I walked to my car, parked a block over, out of sight of the house, because I'd learned decades ago that you never let anyone watch you leave a scene, and I opened the laptop I keep in a locked case in my trunk. Ryan thought I was a 72-year-old man who'd had a minor stroke and couldn't be trusted with his own finances. What he never understood, what he'd never once bothered to ask about in 34 years, was that the banking security protocols protecting half the accounts in this region were partly built by people like me. I hadn't just worked fraud cases. I'd helped design the systems that catch them. I logged into the raw transaction ledger behind my consumer banking app, the version tellers and compliance officers see, not the version customers see, and found the wire immediately. $537,000 routed out at 8:14 the previous morning, bounced through a clearinghouse, and landed in a newly opened account at a bank headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Not North Carolina. My son, deliberately or more likely out of pure carelessness, had just moved stolen funds across a state line. That single fact turned a family dispute into a federal crime. Wire fraud isn't a technicality prosecutors chase for fun. It's one of the most aggressively pursued financial crimes in the country, especially when the victim is a senior citizen and the dollar amount clears. 6 figures. I kept digging. The wire had been authorized using a scanned document uploaded to bypass the bank's fraud triggers. I pulled it up, zoomed in, and there it was, a copy of that expired medical and financial power of attorney, the one I'd revoked in writing over a year earlier. Except the expiration date had been altered. Crudely. The year had been changed with what looked like basic photo editing software. Not even a good forgery, just good enough to fool an overworked bank clerk moving fast on a Thursday morning. Forgery. Wire fraud. Elder financial exploitation. My son had built himself a 3-count federal indictment in under 24 hours, and he had no idea. I saved everything, the altered document, the wire logs, the routing numbers, timestamps, into an encrypted folder, then mirrored it to a private cloud server and sent a copy directly to Sam's office. 2 backups. I never trust one copy of anything. That's rule number 2 of 38 years in this business. I looked at the time. Ryan and Whitney's rehearsal dinner started at 6 that evening at a rented estate called Chestnut Ridge, 25 minutes south of the city near Hendersonville. I had a little over 6 hours. It was time to pay my son a visit at his rehearsal dinner. And I wasn't going in the way he'd expect. I didn't drive my own car to Chestnut Ridge. I left it in a public garage downtown and called a rideshare instead, because the last thing I needed was Ryan's security spotting my sedan in the parking lot and warning him before I was inside. The driver was a quiet kid who kept the radio low, which I appreciated, because I spent the whole 25-minute ride rehearsing exactly how weak I needed to look. Chestnut Ridge Estate sits on 11 acres in the foothills outside Hendersonville, all glass and stacked stone, the kind of rental venue that costs more for one weekend than most people's cars. String lights, a live jazz trio warming up under a pavilion, valets in matching vests parking German cars I recognized and a few I didn't. I walked up the front steps wearing the same khakis and flannel I'd had on since 6 that morning, because I hadn't been given the chance to change. Ryan's movers had taken every suit I owned along with everything else. That worked in my favor more than any tuxedo could have. I found Whitney first, near an outdoor bar built into a converted horse stall, laughing loudly at something with a group of women I didn't recognize, wearing a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. Whitney Sorensen. 29 years old. I'd met her exactly 4 times in the 18 months she and Ryan had been engaged, and every one of those times she'd looked at me the way you look at a stain you're trying not to acknowledge is on your shoe. Her eyes found me across the lawn, and her whole face went through three expressions in about 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and then something close to panic. She crossed the lawn fast, heels clicking against the flagstone, and got right up in my space before I could say a word. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was a hiss, pitched low enough that the women she'd been laughing with a second earlier wouldn't hear it. "You weren't invited tonight, Andy. I just need to talk to my son," I said, letting my shoulders drop, letting my voice shake, just slightly. "There were men in my house today, taking everything." She grabbed my forearm, hard, her nails digging in through the flannel, and steered me a few steps toward the tree line, away from the party. "Keep your voice down. Do you have any idea who's here tonight? Investors. People who matter to my brand. You look homeless, Andy. You are actively ruining the aesthetic of this dinner." She let out a short, ugly laugh. "This is exactly why Ryan had to step in and handle your finances. You can't even dress yourself for a formal event anymore. We're doing you a favor." I let my chin drop, playing every bit of the frail, confused old man she already believed I was. "I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight. Not my problem." She leaned in close enough that I caught the full weight of her perfume. "Turn around, get in a car, and don't come back tomorrow. If you embarrass Ryan in front of these people, I will make sure the rest of your life is spent somewhere with padded walls. You have zero power here. You're broke, you're homeless, and you are a stain on my perfect weekend." Before she could finish enjoying herself, a hand closed hard on my shoulder from behind. Ryan. He smelled like scotch and cologne, wearing a linen suit I didn't recognize. Paid for, I now knew with certainty, by his dead mother's life insurance policy. He didn't say a word to me in front of the crowd. He just gripped my shoulder and steered me, hard, down a side hallway of the main house and into a private study, then shut the door behind us, sealing off the music and the laughter like a switch had been flipped. The room was heavy, dark wood paneling, a wall of unread leather-bound books. A huge mahogany desk clearly meant to make whoever sat behind it feel important. Ryan leaned against it, arms crossed, studying me the way you'd study a problem you were annoyed to still be dealing with. "What is this, Ryan?" I asked, letting my hands tremble. "Why is my house being emptied? Why is my account at zero?" He sighed like I'd asked him something exhausting. "Dad, we've been over this? You don't remember? Remember what?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, tossing it onto the desk between us. The same forged power of attorney I'd already found on my laptop that morning, except now I was holding the physical copy and shaking hands. And something about the paper itself, the actual weight of his betrayal in my palm, hit differently than pixels on a screen ever could. "I had to step in, Dad," he said, and his voice actually softened, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't. "Ever since the stroke, it's been obvious you're slipping. I couldn't just sit back and let you get taken advantage of by some scammer online. I'm protecting you. That's what a son does." I thought, for one unguarded second, about the week of that stroke. About lying in a hospital bed at Mission Hospital downtown, numb down one side, terrified, asking the nurse to call my son. She'd tried him 3 times. He didn't pick up because he and Whitney were on a beach in Turks and Caicos and didn't check their phones for 4 days. I found out from a nurse who felt sorry enough for me to show me his social media on her own phone while I lay there wondering if I'd ever walk normally again. I recovered from that stroke completely alone, and now the boy who never once picked up the phone during the worst week of my life was standing in a rented mansion, in a suit paid for with his mother's memory, telling me he was protecting me. "It's all completely legal, Dad," Ryan said, mistaking the tear that slid down my cheek for defeat instead of what it actually was. Disgust so complete it had nowhere else to go. "You signed it yourself. The house was too much for you to manage alone. I liquidated it so you wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you," I repeated, and I let my voice go small. "I've got my assistant booking you a hotel for the weekend. After the wedding, we'll look at some assisted living places. Somewhere nice. Somewhere with people watching you." He patted my shoulder, the exact same condescending rhythm you'd use on a golden retriever. "You'll make friends." I folded the forged document and slid it into my jacket pocket without a word, and I turned to leave. Ryan had no idea he'd just handed a forensic investigator physical evidence of the exact crime that was going to end his freedom. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully filed his own father away, tidy and quiet, before the ceremony even started. I reached for the door handle, and it swung open before I touched it. Whitney had been listening in the hallway the entire time, waiting for her moment. She stepped fully into the room, closing the door most of the way behind her, boxing me into the small space between them. "You really thought you could show up here and make demands?" she said, shaking her head slowly, savoring it. She dug into a small clutch purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, holding it up between two fingers like she was tipping a valet. Then, she stepped in close and tucked it into my breast pocket herself, patting it twice. "Take a cab to a motel, old man," she said, low enough that only I could hear it. "Buy yourself dinner. Don't you dare show your face at the venue tomorrow. Don't ruin my photos." "Thank you," I murmured, and I dropped my eyes, and I let myself out. I want you to sit with that scene for a second, because it's the reason everything after this happens the way it does. That $100 bill wasn't an insult to me. It was Whitney handing me, without knowing it, a piece of physical evidence with her own fingerprints on it, at the exact moment she was congratulating herself on having won. Arrogance is always the fatal flaw. I built an entire career proving that sentence true, over and over, for 38 years. I walked out of that mansion the same slow, shuffling way I'd walked in, and I didn't drop the act until I was 300 feet down the driveway, out of sight of the valets, standing under a street lamp waiting for another car. Then I pulled that $100 bill out of my breast pocket and looked at it under the light. Whitney thought she'd bought my humiliation for $100. She'd actually just handed a former fraud investigator a physical trophy and a fingerprint sample he didn't even need, because by that point I already knew exactly where this was going. I had another car take me downtown, to a glass office tower on Pack Square where Sam Whitfield still kept a light on late most nights out of habit. It was almost 11:30 when I walked into his office and found him behind his desk, tie loosened, a stack of printouts in front of him. The wire logs, the routing numbers, the forged document, everything I'd sent him that morning. "You look terrible, Andy," he said, not unkindly. "I feel completely clear, Sam." He'd already drafted the report for the FBI's Cybercrimes Division and the emergency motion to freeze the destination account in Atlanta. All it needed was my signature. He took his glasses off and looked at me the way an old friend looks at you when he's about to ask something he already knows the answer to. "I need to ask you this as your lawyer and as somebody who's known you since Reagan's first term," he said. "Once we file this, there's no taking it back. This isn't a civil dispute anymore, Andy. This is federal. They will arrest him. He'll be a convicted felon." "Are you sure?" I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest in front of Carolina Panthers games. I thought about teaching him to parallel park in an empty church lot on Sunday afternoons. And then I thought about a man in a rented mansion patting my shoulder and telling me I'd make friends in assisted living, 3 hours after telling movers to clear out his mother's hope chest. "Blood's not a free pass to destroy the people who raised you, Sam," I said. I gave him every advantage I had. He chose this. I signed the report at 11:47 that night. Sam scanned it into the federal portal, and somewhere in a building I'd never see, a case number got assigned to my son's name. I splashed cold water on my face in Sam's private bathroom, and then the exhaustion finally caught up with me. I stretched out on his leather couch for what I meant to be a few minutes, and was out cold within seconds. Sam let me sleep and kept working. Sam shook my shoulder a little after 3 in the morning. I sat up on the couch, disoriented for a second, the way you are when a nap turns into something deeper than you meant it to. "Cybercrimes acknowledged the file at 3 a.m., he said. "Case is open. And Andy, I pulled the property records on your house while you were asleep. You need to see this." The deed had already been transferred, recorded electronically the previous afternoon. My house, a home Linda and I had built with our own hands over 2 summers in 1981, worth conservatively $950,000 on the current Asheville market, had sold for $475,000, exactly half. "An all-cash deal," Sam said, tapping the page. "No inspection contingency, no mortgage, no standard closing period. Whoever bought this needed speed more than they needed value." "He's not planning to stay for the honeymoon," I said. the pieces clicking into place. He's planning to disappear. $500,000 from the account, another $475,000 from the house. That's over $1 million in liquid cash in under 48 hours. That's not wedding money. That's running money. The buyer on the deed wasn't a person. It was a company. Ridgeline Capital Partners LLC, incorporated exactly 3 days earlier, with a P.O. box for an address and an anonymity service shielding the actual owner. Sam ran it through his old federal database contacts and traced the incorporation filing fee back to a personal credit card. The name that came back wasn't Ryan's. It was a man named Brett Sanders. I'd never heard the name in my life. A quick search turned up a public fitness influencer profile. 31 years old, a personal trainer who ran a small studio downtown, hundreds of gym photos and protein shake selfies, and scattered through his page, tagged at the same studio, over and over, in photos where his hands lingered somewhere a trainer's hands generally shouldn't. Whitney, my son's fiancée, was having an affair with the man who just bought my house for half its value, less than half a day before her own wedding. I sat with that for a long moment, and then I remembered something. Linda's illness had taught me one habit I never dropped afterward. I'd installed a comprehensive home security system in our house during her last 2 years, mostly to monitor for falls when I had to step out. I'd never bothered turning it into the kind of system you sit and watch live. After Linda passed, I set the cameras to record and archive automatically, and mostly forgot about it the same way you stop checking a smoke detector once you trust it's working. My bedroom is upstairs, at the back of the house, well out of earshot of the study and the living room below. Ryan knew about the visible cameras from years of complaining about them every time he visited. He must have let himself in with his old key sometime Wednesday night while I was asleep. 2 floors above him, the same visit, I'd realize later, when he pulled the old property deed out of my desk drawer, the one still listing me as record owner from before the trust ever existed, and gone room to room unplugging every camera he could find on the ground floor, hours before he ever called a moving company. I never heard a thing. What he never knew is that the recording hardware ran independently off a hidden battery backup, uploading everything to a private cloud server the moment it captured it. Pulling a plug out of the wall doesn't erase a memory that's already left the building, and it doesn't wake up an old man sleeping 2 floors away, either. I logged into the archive and scrolled back 3 days, to Tuesday night. At 10 p.m., while I was already upstairs asleep, the same upstairs bedroom, the same 2 floors of distance that had let Ryan move through the house undetected the following night, the front door of my own house opened. Whitney had a key of her own by then. I'd learn later one Ryan had cut for her months earlier, without ever mentioning it to me. She and Brett walked in together, dressed down, laughing, moving through my living room like they owned it, which within 2 days they were legally about to. Brett went straight for my liquor cabinet without hesitating, like he'd done it before, and pulled out a bottle of single malt Linda had bought me for my 60th birthday, a bottle I'd been saving. He poured 2 glasses. "To the easiest payday of my life," he said on the recording, raising his glass. Whitney laughed, sharp and delighted. "I still can't believe Ryan actually bought the whole thing. He thinks he's some kind of financial genius." "Ryan's an idiot," Brett said. "He handed me the deed to $1 million house for half price and thinks he's doing himself a favor. Once the ink's dry Thursday, we're gone. He's going to wake up Saturday with nothing and a federal charge with his name on it." Whitney sat on the arm of my chair, wrapping herself around him. "I'm so glad I don't have to pretend to love him anymore. We take the $537 from the insurance policy, we take the $475 from the house, first flight out Saturday morning, and we never look back. He can rot, for all I care." I paused the recording right there, on their smiling, drunk faces, sitting in my living room drinking Linda's gift to me, mapping out the total destruction of my son. Here's the thing I need you to understand about what happened next in my chest. I felt no relief. My son had betrayed me completely, out of arrogance and greed. But he was doing it, at least in his own head, to build a life with a woman he believed loved him. He was a fool, but he was my fool. And he had absolutely no idea that the woman standing next to him at the altar later that same day had already sold him out to someone else, for the exact same reason he'd sold out his own father. Sam had gone very quiet, staring at the frozen frame on the screen. "Andy," he said slowly, Where did a personal trainer get $475,000 in cash for a same-day closing? That was the right question. Legitimate lenders don't move that kind of money in 24 hours without paperwork trails a mile long. Sam pulled the wire records on the Ridgeline Capital account and traced the source of the funds to a private commercial lender called Blue Summit Lending, operating out of an industrial park outside the city. Sam's face went pale. Blue Summit isn't a real lender, Andy. It's a front. The district attorney's office has been trying to build a racketeering case against the people behind it for 4 years. High-interest cash loans to people who can't get financing anywhere legitimate, and when borrowers don't pay, Blue Summit doesn't sue anybody. They send people. Brett Sanders hadn't borrowed money from a bank. He'd borrowed it from loan sharks, promising to flip a house he thought was worth nearly $1 million and pay them back with a massive profit margin, then vanished to some other country with Whitney and never looked back. There was only one problem with his plan, and it was one he had absolutely no way of knowing about. 4 years earlier, right after Linda's diagnosis, Sam and I had sat in his office and moved the 2 assets that could actually be moved at the time, the house and our investment accounts, into an irrevocable trust. Legally, I hadn't owned that house in 4 years. Neither had Ryan. The old deed he found in my desk drawer, the one I deliberately kept instead of shredding once the trust took over, exactly for a moment like this one, still listed me, personally, as record owner. It gave Ryan everything a title company clerk would expect to see: the correct legal description, the correct parcel number, my name on file. Armed with that and the altered power of attorney, he'd been able to sign a brand new deed as my supposed attorney-in-fact and push it through recording before anyone at the county thought to look past the surface. What nobody checked, not Ryan, not Ridgeline's closing attorney, not the clerk who stamped it, was the one thing that actually mattered. I hadn't been the true legal owner in 4 years. The trust was. And a forged, expired power of attorney doesn't grant authority over a trust it was never written into in the first place. The life insurance policy was different, and deliberately so. Back then, there was no payout yet to protect. Linda was still alive. What we did instead was name the trust itself as the policy's sole beneficiary, so that whenever the day came, the insurer would be legally required to pay the money straight to the trust, not to me personally. That part worked exactly as designed. The problem was what happened after. Once Linda passed and the payout landed, the trust released it into a standard operating account in my name specifically so I could move fast on the community center purchase the moment the right building came open. A trust account holding 6 figures in cold storage doesn't let you make a competitive cash offer on a building. That account was real, it was liquid, and it was mine to access. It was never meant to sit there for 20 months waiting for the right piece of real estate. It just took longer than either of us planned. And in the meantime, it was exactly the kind of account a forged power of attorney could actually touch. That's the part I hadn't accounted for. Ryan didn't steal a decoy. He stole real money, and for the better part of 2 days, it was actually gone, sitting in a live account in Atlanta, Georgia, completely outside my control until the FBI's emergency freeze order caught up to it. The house was a different story entirely. Ryan had sold a house he never legally owned. Ridgeline Capital had bought a worthless piece of paper. And the moment their $475,000 landed in the decoy account, tied to my trust's security protocols, it had been automatically frozen and flagged for federal fraud review, money that Brett Sanders now owed to violent people, with absolutely no way to get it back. You let a loan shark front hand nearly $500,000 to a fake real estate deal, Sam said, and for the first time all night he actually laughed, low, disbelieving, half horrified. Andy, this isn't a trap anymore. It's a minefield, and you built it every inch of it. They built it themselves, I said. I just left the door unlocked and waited. Later that day, all 3 of them were going to stand in front of 300 guests believing they'd already won. I intended to be there when they found out otherwise. By the time we'd finished piecing together everything on Brett Sanders and Blue Summit Lending, the sun was already coming up outside Sam's office windows. I slept 2 more hours on his couch, showered again in his private bathroom, and put on the one suit that hadn't been in my house when the movers came. A charcoal gray suit I'd left hanging in Sam's guest closet years earlier after a fundraising dinner, because Sam and I had been trading favors in formal wear since before Ryan was born. I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. Not because I looked different, because for the first time in 20 months, I didn't look like a man carrying grief. I looked like a man about to finish a case. I checked my phone. The video file from Tuesday night was downloaded, backed up twice, ready to play through any auxiliary cable in the country. The audio recording of Ryan's confession from Thursday afternoon was saved next to it. In my wallet, folded neatly, was a $100 bill with Whitney's fingerprints on it. Evidence I didn't strictly need anymore, but I was keeping it anyway, for reasons that were entirely mine. Sam drove. Neither of us said much on the way out to Chestnut Ridge. There wasn't much left to say. The wedding started at 4 that afternoon, and we pulled into the gravel lot just after 3:30, Sam parking deliberately across two spaces near the exit road, blocking a catering van, in case we needed to leave fast. I walked toward the ceremony lawn alone. 300 white folding chairs faced a wooden arch wrapped in eucalyptus, overlooking a small lake. A string quartet was playing something soft. Ryan stood at the altar in a tailored navy suit, looking, for just one more minute, like the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on long car rides home from his grandparents' place in Boone. I walked to the small technical table at the back, where a college-age sound engineer was running the ceremony's microphone feed. And before he could ask if I needed help finding my seat, I reached down and pulled the main power cable clean out of the mixing board. The music died mid-note. The officiant's voice cut off in the middle of a sentence. 300 heads turned around at once. I walked down the center aisle in a suit nobody there recognized, and I watched my son's face go from confusion to horror to fury in about 4 seconds. He looked for a moment exactly like he did at 9 years old, getting caught in a lie he thought was airtight. "Get him out of here!" Ryan shouted at the two security guards stationed at the edges of the lawn, his voice cracking. Whitney spun around in her dress, her face twisting into something I hadn't seen from her before. Real fear, not performance. "What is wrong with you? Get this pathetic old man out of my wedding." I didn't stop walking. I stepped up onto the wooden platform, walked past my own son, and picked up the second microphone stand, meant for the singer, who backed away without me having to ask. The security guards reached the base of the stairs, and then just stood there, clearly unsure whether tackling a 72-year-old man in a suit was going to be the story they told at Thanksgiving for the rest of their lives. I plugged my phone into the auxiliary line running to the speaker system, and I spoke without raising my voice, because I didn't need to anymore. 300 people had gone completely silent. "Ryan," I said, "yesterday you told me I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. You told me to find an extended stay place and start looking at assisted living. You emptied your mother's life insurance policy, the money she made me promise before she passed, to build a shelter for kids who grew up exactly like she did. And you spent it funding this." I watched him swallow, watched Whitney step slightly behind him, using him as a shield, her eyes darting toward the exits. "That money crossed a state line 2 mornings ago when you wired it to an account in Atlanta. That's not a family dispute, Ryan. That's federal wire fraud. I reported it last night. There's an open FBI case with your name on it as of 3 a.m. The account is frozen. Every dollar." I let that land. Then I kept going. "The house you sold, the house your mother and I built with our own hands years before you were even born, you sold it by forging a power of attorney and using it to sign a deed you had zero legal authority to sign. That document expired over a year ago. I revoked it in writing, with a witness. You committed identity theft to push a fraudulent sale through the county's recording office, because 4 years ago I moved the actual title into a trust you never knew existed. You didn't sell my house, Ryan. You forged your way into signing away a house that was never legally mine to sign away in the first place, and the second the title company catches up to that, the sale reverses itself. That $475,000 is frozen right alongside the rest." Ryan's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. He looked at Whitney, then back at me, mouth open, no sound coming out. I turned my phone toward the crowd, hit play, and let Brett Sanders' voice fill the lawn. "To the easiest payday of my life." Then Whitney's, laughing. "I still can't believe Ryan actually bought the whole thing." Somewhere in the third row, a man I'd never met until that exact second, tall, tan, wearing a suit that fit a little too well, stood up fast, looking for the nearest exit. I found his eyes across the lawn. "Going somewhere, Brett?" I said into the microphone, and every head in the crowd swung toward the stranger frozen mid-aisle. "The money you owe Blue Summit Lending is gone. Frozen in a federal account, tied to a house you never actually bought." I'd imagine they're expecting a call. As if summoned, his phone started ringing in his jacket pocket, loud, insistent, filling the silence of 300 stunned wedding guests. He looked down at the screen, and whatever name was on it drained the last of the color out of his face. Ryan sank down onto the wooden platform, right there in his Navy suit, and put his face in his hands. "I want to tell you the sirens arrived like something out of a movie." And honestly, they kind of did. 3 unmarked SUVs came off the gravel road doing well over the speed limit, cutting straight across the lawn instead of using the driveway. And 6 federal agents in tactical vests were out of the vehicles before the engines had even finished settling. They read Ryan his rights at the base of the altar. 2 more agents caught Brett Sanders halfway to the tree line and put him face down in the grass. Whitney dropped to her knees in front of me, her dress pooling in the dirt, grabbing at the leg of my suit pants, begging me to tell them she'd had nothing to do with it, that Brett had manipulated her, that she still loved Ryan, that she'd testify against both of them if it meant I'd help her. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the $100 bill she'd tucked into my pocket less than 24 hours earlier, and I let it drop into her lap. "Get a cab," I said, and I meant every word of what that sentence actually meant. Your aesthetics ruined anyway. 6 months passed. Autumn settled over the Blue Ridge foothills the way it does every year, and my house on Montfort Street, fully restored, every piece of furniture recovered through the criminal restitution process, finally stopped feeling hollow. Ryan didn't fight the charges. Facing a recorded confession, forged documents, and wire records that left no room for interpretation, his public defender pushed him toward a plea deal. He's serving 4 years at a federal facility, 2 states away. He writes me letters sometimes. I read every one. I haven't answered any of them yet. Maybe someday. Not yet. Whitney's cooperation deal kept her out of federal prison, but it didn't save the life she'd built her whole identity around. Her online following evaporated within a week of the arrests going public. Last I heard from Sam, who still keeps tabs out of old habit, she was working retail in Charlotte and paying down legal fees that would take her years to clear. Brett Sanders vanished from Asheville entirely about 3 days after the wedding, leaving his gym membership list, his leased car, and an unpaid debt to people who do not forgive unpaid debts. Nobody I know has heard from him since. And honestly, nobody's looking very hard. The frozen funds, every dollar of the $537,000 from Linda's policy, plus the $475,000 seized as fraudulent proceeds from Blue Summit Lending, were released back to my trust as court-ordered restitution. Every cent of it went exactly where Linda always wanted it to go. 3 weeks ago, I stood on the west side of Asheville, near the river, and cut a ribbon in front of a fully renovated building with a small brass plaque by the front door. The Linda Jackson Haven, a safe place to land. I think about my son more than I let on to anyone, even Sam. I don't regret what I did. I regret that it was necessary. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one at 3 in the morning. Family isn't blood. It's respect, freely given and freely earned. And at 72 years old, I've learned my life isn't over just because somebody I raised decided to try to end it early. It's just been properly audited. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.